Welcome back to Kirsty's virtual classroom. Today in California geology, we are talking about California's gold. So, gold in California was founded or discovered in the mid-1800s. So, in 1847, James W. Marshall partnered with John Sutter to build a lumber mill in Coloma, California. The site was chosen because of its proximity to the river, known as the American River. Part of Marshall's partnership was that he would oversee the construction of the mill. And then on January 24th, 1848, Marshall spotted something shiny in the Sutter Creek River. Sutter Creek, excuse me. He had unexpectedly discovered gold while overseeing construction of the sawmill. Although the discovery was supposed to be kept secret, word spread rapidly, and soon thousands of people came all over the country to strike it rich. So here is James Marshall and John Sutter, the two founders of gold in California. So where is this gold? Well, a lot of it has been mined, but most of it is found in Northern California, and specifically in the Yreka, Shasta area, and the Sierra Nevada. So there has been approximately 115 million ounces of gold produced. 75% was found in the western foothills, which is called the Mother Lode Belt. And here's kind of an image of where some of the mines are, the placer mines and the lode mines. And then this is the Mother Lode Belt here. So a lot in the Sonora area, Hornitos, all of those areas were very heavily mined and produced a lot of gold. So a lot of it is found on old river channels. So for instance, we just talked about the American River. There are a lot of deposits along the riverbeds that you can find gold. And so you've probably seen gold panning and things like that, where they pick up a bunch of sediment along with water and kind of try to separate out the gold. So in the Metamorphic Belt, there was a lot of native gold found, and then there was also some gold deposited in the oceanic rocks at the spreading center by seawater circulation, and then they remobilized by hydrothermal fluids related to granite intrusions. So a lot of this is found in quartz and granitic intrusions. So the gold formed around 115 to 120 million years ago. But there are a lot of misconceptions. So popular misconception is that natural gold has cooled from a molten state, when it is in fact transported through the Earth's crust dissolved in warm to hot salty water. So these fluids are generated in a huge volume deep in the Earth's crust as water-bearing minerals dehydrate during metamorphism. And then any gold that's present in the rocks is heated and squeezed, sweated out, and goes into the solution as complex ions. In this form, dissolved gold, along with other elements such as silicon, iron, sulfur, migrates wherever fractures in the rocks allow the fluids to pass. So there has to be fractures in the rocks in order for this fluid to intrude. It can't push through existing rock. So this direction is usually or generally upwards to cooler regions, to lower pressures. Obviously, most things in nature want to flow from an area of high pressure to low pressure. And this generally pushes them towards the Earth's surface. So then under these conditions, the gold eventually becomes insoluble and begins to crystallize. So most often this happens in quartz. And so this is where we see most of the gold deposits, especially in the Sierra Nevada. So here's kind of a look at what the gold formation would have looked like. These kind of blobby areas that are dark gray are gold deposits. And so here we have, for instance, one of the continental volcanoes as the Sierra Nevadas are upwelling. And this is where, along all of these fault regions and any of the cracks that you see in rocks, is where all of the gold deposits will actually form. So lodes are primary gold source in California. Placer deposits form in rivers that eroded the lode outcrops. Okay, so here's an example of a lode where it would have been in this quartz vein here. So the gold-bearing channel is in there. And eventually that erodes out and ends up in the river. So rivers are sometimes diverted completely in order to actually dig out all of the gold they can find. Miners dug for gold in the newly exposed river bottom after they moved the river. Nowadays, diverting rivers is an environmental nightmare. So if you ever have to do construction in a riverbed, it is really difficult. There's a lot of regulations around that now. But in the 1800s, they just moved the water wherever they wanted. Didn't matter, so that they could actually get the gold out. So here's a look at some of the river deposits. So in a stream, especially a meandering stream, you're going to see high velocity as it bends around a curve, and then the low velocity on the inside of a curve is where all of the deposit will be. So they knew approximately where they needed to look based on the stream flow. So here's some gold mining techniques. There's a lot of areas in the mountains that you can drive up to and actually do this. You get a bunch of material and you kind of sift it out. So gold in the California gravel beds are so richly concentrated that the early 49ers simply panned for gold in California's rivers and streams. There wasn't as much mining involved. They were really just sifting through material. So some of the gold mining techniques is using hoppers and washers. So we have cradles, rockers, and long toms. So just kind of depending on the advancement of the miners and what they had time for, they would use some of these different things. Here's a gold washing tom, here's a cradle. All of this was set up so that they could separate all of the stuff that they didn't want from the gold. And remember, gold is heavy, so all of the gold would drop out, hopefully, in all of these instances as they washed things, and then they would hold them back towards the end here in these riffles as water flowed through and took all of the other stuff they didn't want. So here are some placer deposits or some nuggets from Tuolumne County. So obviously the more gravel processed, the more gold is found. And this is when hydraulic mining became the largest scale and definitely the most devastating form of placer mining. So here water is redirected into an ever narrowing channel and out through a giant iron nozzle. And the water, there's extremely high pressure steam that is used to wash the entire hillside. And this ended up devastating a lot of areas by mining in this way. So here is a diagram of a gold dredge. So this was dredging in the actual riverbeds. So here we are actually digging and they're trying to pull material out. So here's the dredge line, and then that actually goes through this kind of sifting material here and dumps back out. So all the washed gravel that they don't want ends up there, and the gold is caught here because it's heavier than all the other material. So there is some local gold dredging that was occurring. So Tuolumne, which is in Sierra Nevada, was being dredged significantly in order to pull out as much gold as possible. So pretty cool historical signs and different things that you can find in those areas. Here's one on LaGrange. This is a really old Tuolumne gold dredge that was on the river. Here are some buckets, just part of the machinery. And here's what a modern gold dredger would look like, or just the modern dredger. They're much smaller, obviously, and they're much more efficient than in the 1800s. So then you often see these linear piles of gravel, and these are a result of the dredging. So this is everything that was not useful to them, not gold essentially. And it's very destructive to the river. So, as you can see, it kind of creates all of these other river channel things that the water might want to flow through, but it can't successfully flow in a nice pattern. So this photo in particular is from LaGrange, California. Here's some more. These are actually in Alaska, but it kind of gives you a really good sense of just how devastating these dredge piles can be. Here's some more gold dredge piles. These are a little bit more linear. They're not as devastating as those ones I just showed you in Alaska, but they're still not good for the direction of the flow of the river. So here's some more. These ones actually appear to be one right after another, but this whole area is no longer rich in trees and vegetation. So we see a lot of damage to the environment on the banks of the river as well. So here's a look at hydraulic mining. So these water cannons are used to obliterate the banks of the rivers throughout the gold country. So here are the banks of the streams, and they are just throwing water at the hill to try to erode it, essentially. And it's very damaging, obviously. And they're using a lot of water, which would not be acceptable nowadays. Here's a look at a larger hydraulic mining operation. Obviously, we've got a pretty significant hole that they have dug here, looking for these gold deposits. So stream bank destruction started to really show after we saw this hydraulic mining, and then a lot of it was not restored. So what ends up happening with a lot of these kind of damages from mining is, prior to some of our new regulations, a lot of that damage was just left. They didn't try to do any restoration or anything. But nowadays, if you want to open up a mine, or if you have an existing mine, you have to have some sort of restoration plan for fixing the area or trying to restore the area back to its original state once you are done with your mining operations. So here's kind of a look at some of the damage that was done. This would have been just a normal stream, and now it's this huge hole that they have just obliterated. Here's some more look at gravel deposits that were washed into these really small channels, which is where the gold is actually recovered, but it just left basically a mess. Here's some more stream and bank destruction, excuse me. This is from 2003, this image. So this is pretty significant that we still haven't seen a lot of, riparian development, even though this happened in the mid 1800s. Here's another look at the same thing. Some more destruction from this hydraulic mining. So by 1883, San Francisco was estimated to be filling with silt at a rate of 1 foot per year, which is really bad. So debris, silt, and millions of gallons of water were used daily that caused extensive flooding and that eventually filled San Francisco Bay. In 1880, some 40,000 acres of farmland and orchards were destroyed, while another 270,000 were severely damaged. So overall, 12 billion tons of earth were blasted out of the hills and washed into local rivers, which devastated the ecosystem. Sacramento Valley farmers filed lawsuits. One of the big ones was Woodruff, versus North Bloomfield Mining and Gravel Company. On January 7th, 1884, a judge declared hydraulic mining illegal. So they did get a lot of really nice gold out of this, though. So here's a look at some of the crystalline gold. This is extremely rare, but it can be worth a lot of money. So the nuggets are obviously still worth money, but anything that you find crystalline like this and recover it in its crystalline form is worth a lot of money, more than just the standard gold rate. There's also the mother lode gold. So due to the nature of gold formation in the Sierra, the precious metal is frequently found embedded in quartz veins, like we've talked about. So here is the quartz, and you see these veins of gold oftentimes found with them. Here's a look at some mother lode gold with quartz. So this is a significant amount of quartz, significant amount of gold, excuse me. It's still a lot of quartz too, but it's a significant amount of gold here. If you found this amount of gold, you would be very rich. Here's another look at the mother lode gold. So when we're extracting gold from quartz, it's a little bit different than hydraulic mining or placer mining. So there's multiple steps that are taken. First, the rock has to be broken down into smaller pieces, and without modern machinery, they used horse mills to do this. Once it's broken, the rock was placed in a stamp mill where it was crushed to sand-sized particles. This did crush up the gold oftentimes, so you didn't get these large pieces. So here's a horse mill. The horses would have been tied here. The horses walked in a circle, and large rocks were dragged basically through this track to try to break up the rocks. So in the old days, miners placed mercury to try to get some of the finer gold out. So at the base of the old stamp mills, there would be an amalgamator. So this is a device with a metal plate coated with a thin film of mercury on the surface. And crushed ore or concentrates were fed slowly over the plate, and gold adhered to the mercury. So they used like an open system method, where the mercury lost through the system went out with the tailings into the environment. But that would be a crazy thing to do today and cause the environmental protection agencies to roll over, because mercury has been found to be very toxic. I know, like my mom and some of the baby boomer older generation are would have been used to like playing with mercury when they were little, but now it is thought to be very, very dangerous to use. So you shouldn't handle it without PPE or personal protective equipment. So here's kind of a look at what it would do as it passed through this amalgam plate. This is a mixture of gold and mercury here. So this is a stamp mill. And so the gold would adhere to the mercury, and then they could actually use the gold and run everything else out. Here's another look at the mill. Here is the amalgamation table. This is the stamp. These are the screens to filter the slurry. And then here we have a 3-sided part that drove the mechanism up and down. These lifted the rods and held the stamps. And then the water is driven by this wheel. Here's a stamp mill in Mariposa. So if you don't know much about Mariposa in California, just northeast of Fresno, it was a very famous spot as well for gold mining. So, like I said, we have discovered that mercury is not good for people. It is very toxic. So, miners use mercury to recover the gold, but what do they do when it's done? A lot of it was actually dumped with the tailings, and as we've learned so far, they were not taking care to the environment, essentially. They didn't take anything into consideration as what they were, all of their output or their tailings, the stuff that they didn't want, whether that was damaging to the environment or not, and that included the mercury. A lot of gold particles were covered with liquid mercury, that formed that amalgam that helps them actually produce more gold than with these fine particle golds than just large nuggets that they found. So the loss of mercury during the gold process estimated to be about 10 to 30% per season. So it's approximated that mercury was lost in the amount of 10 million pounds lost and just basically contaminated into the environment. So here's a gold pan with more than 30 grams of mercury per 1 kilogram of mercury contaminated sediments was collected in a drainage tunnel. So here's some locations of health advisories for mercury in sport fish consumed in California. So the water bodies labeled in red have fish consumption advisories for mercury. So this is all of the gold dredging areas, so all the areas where they mined gold in California. Almost all of those water bodies are contaminated highly with mercury, and so a lot of the fish in the area have ingested more mercury than they should. And if you eat the fish, then you are essentially ingesting more mercury than you should. So there are advisories when you are fishing in those regions. Now here's a look at the Ironstone Winery gold leaf specimen. This is the largest gold specimen in the world. It was discovered in 1892 by Sonora Mining Company, actually on Christmas Day. It is 44 pounds, and it has it was found between layers of quartz. So this is a quartz-bearing gold, and it's 98% pure. So initially, the miners believed that it was just a piece of disregarded rusting metal from a piece of mining equipment. And boy, were they wrong. So luckily, they recovered it, and it actually sits in a very nice vault at the Ironstone Winery. All right, so that's it for our PowerPoint on gold in California. I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.